Please rise out of respect for the gospel. The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 13th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord, beginning with verse 31. When Judas was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I told the Jews, so I will tell you now. Where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." This is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. All right, I know we have a lot of children in worship today, so here's your chance, kids. You can shout out the answer if you know it. I give you permission. Who was it who said the following statement in a recent, very popular movie? Some people are worth melting for. Olaf. Olaf from the movie Frozen. Olaf was the little snowman who was kept behind locked doors. He was held captive with Princess Anna in the castle. And Princess Anna was frozen at this point, and Olaf was afraid she was going to die. So Olaf starts a fire in the fireplace, and as he stokes the fire, little Olaf, the snowman, starts to melt. And Princess Anna realizes that Olaf is melting, and she shows her concern. "Olaf, you're going to melt." And Olaf turned and looked at Princess Anna, and he said, "Some people are worth melting for." That's love. That's sacrificial love. And that's the kind of love that Jesus is talking about in the gospel reading for today. Sacrificial love. And when we, God's people, reach out to one another with sacrificial love shown in acts of service, then God receives the glory. You heard in that reading all the glory, 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 glorified. It sounded like some double talk sometimes. But that's what Jesus is talking about. When his people reach out to one another, when we are willing to sacrifice for one another in acts of service, then God receives the glory. Christ is seen here on earth when we reach out to one another. The gospel lesson for today takes place in the upper room. Now, this would be what we call Maundy Thursday. It's right after what we traditionally refer to as the Last Supper. Jesus has knelt before all of his disciples and washed their feet, assuming the position of a slave. He has given them an example of service, of reaching out in love and serving his disciples. Right after that, Judas is identified as the betrayer. He leaves the upper room, goes to carry out his deed that will put in motion God's plan of salvation. Jesus will be arrested, crucified, he will be resurrected, and eventually ascend back to heaven. God's plan of salvation. Why? Because God believes that all mankind was worth dying for, was worth sacrificing his only Son on the cross to make sure that all mankind was saved. Because God understands all people are worth melting for. All people are worth dying for. And Jesus chooses the cross because Jesus knows that all mankind was worth dying for. You heard it in Stacy's children's message today. There's no difference between us in the eyes of God. All people were worth saving. All people were worth dying for. Sacrificial love shown in acts of service. We have multiple opportunities every day, everywhere we go, in our own lives to reach out and love one another, giving God the glory. And we see from time to time some pretty high-profile examples. In February 2002, Chardon High School here in Ohio suffered a student who went on a shooting rampage, but two teachers, Frank Hall and Joseph Ricci, put their lives in danger to protect their students. In Mexico, Martha Alanis, a nursery school teacher, lays on the floor singing songs to her preschool children in order to distract them as a shooter is on a rampage outside the building. In Malaysia, Lu Lang loses his life during an earthquake as he uses his own body to protect his students. Boulders are coming down from the mountains in an earthquake, and this teacher chooses to protect his students with his own body and loses his life. Officer Murad Khan lost his life as he embraces a suicide bomber in Afghanistan in order to save other civilians standing around. Sacrificial love. Acts of sacrificial love shown in acts of service, because all people are worth dying for. We see it all the time, and we have the opportunity also to show sacrificial love to one another. Here, certainly here at Grace, but definitely beyond these walls, into our community and around the world as well. Acts of sacrificial love. So what does it look like? I said at the early service, and I really believe this, that it seems like so often my messages are about our time, our resources, and our abilities. I know you hear me say it all the time. We are to give of our time, our resources, and our abilities. And sometimes I feel like that's the only thing I ever bring a message about. But, these are the gifts that God gives us. And when He gives us our time, our resources, and our abilities, He gives them to us with the call on our lives to turn around and invest them back into the lives of other people, especially when we are showing love and it requires some sacrifice. So what about our time? What about our time? Do you notice how we are so concerned with hanging on to our time? And do you ever notice how we fill our time with things that benefit ourselves and our families, leaving little or no time to invest back into the kingdom of heaven? Certainly no time to give to help someone else. And yet, we are called to show Christ to the world. We are called to go out and take some of our time and invest it at one of the local missions, Sharon Care, Food Pantry, Soup Kitchen, Liberty Center. Love Your Neighbor Day is coming up in a week. 4 hours. 4 hours twice a year to go out into this community, your very own community, and show the people the love of Christ in acts of service. And when we do, then God is glorified. Yes, sometimes it seems like we have no time left. I'm guilty of saying, oh, I'm so busy. How often do you hear that? I'm so busy. Talk to most people will say, I'm so busy, I just don't have any time. Maybe that's exactly what God is calling us to do. Give some of that time, even when it requires a sacrifice. Invest our time into the kingdom of heaven and show the world Christ. And what about our resources? That's our money. That is our money. And we are called to take a portion of our money and invest it back into the work of the kingdom. Invest it in one of the local missions. Invest it in a mission somewhere else in the world, in Africa or somewhere else. Invest it into the life of a person you know who needs help. Now, hear what I am not saying. I am not saying we give away so much of our money that we cannot take care of ourselves. It is necessary that we take care of our own food and shelter and clothing and medical care, of course. What I am saying is that we are called to put aside a portion of our money to invest into the kingdom of heaven, to help other people. And yes, sometimes it requires a sacrifice when you take that little bit of money that you were going to use for your next car, or your next vacation, or your next outfit, or to go and do something fun for yourself. Maybe, just maybe, every once in a while, we are being called to invest that money back into the kingdom of heaven. When we do, God is glorified. And then there is our abilities. We have been given abilities. Every one of us have abilities, and we are called to use them to invest back into the kingdom of heaven and touch the lives of others. What does that look like? That looks like ushering, greeting, running the sound, singing in the choir, teaching Sunday school, leading an adult Bible study. It means giving a ride to someone who needs a ride. It means being a prayer warrior in your home. It means taking your abilities and using them to invest back into someone else's life. And yes, sometimes that requires sacrifice. But every time we do, we show the world Christ and God gets the glory. But do you notice? Do you notice, if you're like me, and I think you are, how easily we let ourselves off the hook? How often do I see a need and I say, oh, someone else has better abilities, someone else can better afford to give that money, someone else has more time, they'll do it better than I will do it, somebody else can take care of this. I don't feel up to it. I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I have enough of whatever. Time, money, abilities. And we let ourselves off the hook. But you can be sure that if God brings an opportunity into your life, He has already given you everything you need to meet it. We are just called to step out in faith and sacrifice in order to meet the need. And every time we do, the love of Christ is shown and God gets the glory. Sacrificial love is loving one another as Christ has loved us. And it is seen in acts of service. And here's the thing. There's a whole spiritual truth going on here. You know, we get caught up in just looking at our lives and the world and our everyday comings and going in material ways. We look at each other. Everything is material to us, the here and the now. But there's a whole spiritual realm going on out there, and there's a spiritual truth at work here. And that is that love melts. Love melts. When we reach out to someone else in an act of service and showing the love of Christ, love has the power to melt feelings and emotions. It can melt pride and prejudice, unforgiveness, hate, anger, evil, revenge, jealousy. Love melts. Because it's pretty hard to hate the person who is washing your feet. And it's pretty hard to be prejudiced against the person that you're kneeling in front of to wash their feet. Love overcomes evil. And every time one of God's children steps out of their comfort zone, every time one of God's children sacrifices time, resources, or abilities to touch somebody else with the love of Christ, that love melts negative feelings and emotions. That's a truth. That's a spiritual truth. And that is how we are called to glorify God. And that's the challenge for the church. You already knew what the challenge was going to be. You already knew what I was going to say because we already know this. I'm going to guess that everybody sitting here already knew that we are called to sacrifice to show love for one another. The challenge is accept that truth, claim that truth, and then step out and sacrifice the next time God brings an opportunity to you. Don't let yourself off the hook. Step out and sacrifice, knowing that you have already been given everything you need to do what God has asked you to do. God doesn't set us up to fail. He has already equipped us with everything we need to go out into this world and show them the love of Christ in acts of service. And in so doing, we give God the glory. That is the challenge for the church. The good news was heard in the Revelation reading that we heard earlier. That's a vision of heaven. It is our future. Why? Because God believed that all mankind was worth dying for. God sacrificed his son on the cross because he believed that all men were worth saving. And because we claim that promise, that's our future. The kingdom of heaven in its fullness, where there is no crying, no sorrow, no pain, no suffering, no evil, no illness, no grief. It is the kingdom in its fullness, and it is your future and mine. That's the good news. The question is, do we believe that all people are worth melting for? Please rise and join together for the hymn of the day. It's printed in your bulletin.